Hi, this is Greg Kihlstrom. Welcome to the Agile World podcast, where we discuss customer experience, employee experience, and transformation in an agile age. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to TEKsystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed on this show, you can go to my website at theagile.world and read my latest articles or get a copy of my latest book, The Center of Experience, a blueprint for creating an experience-led organization, now available on Amazon and other retailers. My name is Greg Kihlstrom, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of CareerGig and host of the Agile World podcast. I'm excited to introduce the final episode of a special three-part series about how the COVID pandemic has impacted technology roadmaps and how enterprises are leveraging cloud technologies to build resiliency. Brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. Today, we're going to talk about how organizations are recalibrating technology roadmaps while pivoting and prioritizing the big rocks crucial to creating a resilient enterprise in a new digital economy. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome the Vice President of Technology Products and Services at TEKsystems, Ricardo Madan. First, why don't you tell me a little bit about your background and what you do at TEKsystems?
Sure, and it's great to be here. Thank you for having us on again, Greg.
Absolutely.
And relative to what I do at TEKsystems, for the last time you had me on the show, I am still blessed to to lead our technology practice, technology solutioning, and service delivery functions here at TEKsystems Global Services. So they have not seen fit to change the job description yet. Still doing the same stuff, and very happy to be doing the same stuff.
Great. Well, yeah, I'm looking forward to talking with you again. So let's start this episode by talking about a topic that seems to have gained even more traction during the pandemic, digital transformation. So when we talk about digital transformation or becoming a digitally enabled organization, what does that mean to you?
For us, it simply means leveraging modern technology and modern methods to solve business problems and ultimately enhance our customer value, our customer experience. Really, really simple. Academically, though, I do like how George Westerman describes digital transformation and enabling digital transformation side of an organization. And George is the principal research scientist at MIT, author of a really cool book, Leading Digital, if anybody wants to check that out. But his words in the description is very simply, quote unquote, digital transformation is the phenomenon which marks a radical rethinking of how an organization uses technology, people, and processes to fundamentally change business performance. So for us, Greg, we can throw rhetoric and drop fashionable buzzwords like disruption and a whole bunch of other cool things to try to define it way more elaborately, but that's sort of it for us.
Great. Well, it's certainly amazing to witness the pace of change and the acceleration we've seen during the pandemic. Let's talk a little bit about how this global pandemic has altered the landscape and cloud's role in helping organizations rebuild and return to growth. So how has the pandemic impacted organizations' behaviors in terms of how they operate?
Yeah, this is a big one, and I think IDC does a really good job organizing pandemic-induced behaviors across what they call their 5 stages of recovery. They chart these stages on a U-curve, which represents the overall economic declines, troughs, and then the rises and peaks, which various industries and companies are in the throes of experiencing right now. And Greg, you and I hear it all the time. We hear things like V-shaped recovery and U-shaped recovery and K-shaped recovery, all these recoveries, right? But IDC's simple U-curve really accommodates most of the postulations in our humble assessment. To try to describe it a little bit, the left side of the curve comprises the first 2 stages of that recovery, which include business continuity as the first stage. And that is where we find behaviors aimed at things like just keeping the lights on amidst the shocks in revenue, amidst continued virtualization of entire workforces, other challenges like that. And then we've got cost optimization, very simply, as the second stage. And like the name implies, behaviors here gravitate towards conserving cash, securing as much of the workforce as possible amidst all of the turbulence. And generally, the behaviors for companies in these stages are defensive in nature. It's all about preserving business, preserving people. But then we move into the middle to later stages on the center to right side of the curve, and they span business resiliency. That's at the bottom of the curve. And here we've got behaviors geared towards ensuring you're built to endure potential recessionary forces that we are certainly feeling. We have been and will continue to. But also really along with withstanding the disruption that companies are going to experience from ultimately the fourth stage, aptly named targeted investments. And this is where companies intentionally are finding ways to return to growth. And then we've got the fifth and final stage, which IDC likes, and you've probably heard this term out there. They like to call it the future enterprise. I'm also doing air quotes for you right now. You don't see it. But future enterprise is on the top right hand of that curve, of that U curve, and organizational behaviors here begin to chart what we call the next normal. The next normal is the overall economy returns to some semblance of broader stability. So we've got companies in different stages, but I'd say broadly speaking, there are digital leaders and there's digital laggards, which you can discern by behaviors and priorities across that span. And unsurprisingly, the laggards are companies that are stuck in stages 1 and 2. They're conserving cash and hanging on. And the digital leaders are showing resilience. They're already innovating into that quote unquote next normal in stages 3 through 5. And, if I could, Greg, I'd like to breathe some real world life into all of this, because that was like a big academic description. I probably bored all of your listeners. But but to breathe some life into that, we can unpack how a great customer of ours, Centera Health, who I definitely classify as a digital leader, how they've behaved throughout the pandemic and how they're pivoting toward that future enterprise stage, all because of the pandemic. So during the first month of the outbreak, they asked us to implement Sage. And Sage is our proprietary AI chatbot platform. And at least in this instance, we deployed it on Google Cloud, which we'll talk more about later, I'm sure. And they needed Sage to help automate their level 1 support functions in order to better contend with the crazy call volume that happened across the country during the first wave of infections. All the big healthcare organizations were getting slammed, as you probably heard and saw and maybe even felt. And really to brag on our team a little bit, we stood Sage up on GCP, on the Google Cloud platform, within days. Compared to a lot of the off-the-shelf options by big AI software providers that take months to implement. But anyway, I digress. The net is that Sage was able to help them drive up vital CX, vital customer experience during scary times for thousands of members, thousands of patients who were trying to get a beat on symptoms, trying to get a beat on whether they should see their physician or not, trying to get a beat on a parent in assisted living. I mean, it is still dire, but it was so dire up front. And Sage really helped us automate and reduce wait times and really get members and subscribers answers that they needed quicker, better, faster. And we really like how Centera describes this. It's quote unquote innovation at the front lines. And that has now started to bridge, to your question, started to bridge their current state with other AI and cloud-oriented transformation post-pandemic. So the behaviors now started to almost telegraph what they're going to be doing around AI and around cloud in the future because of the pandemic.
Yeah. Well, in your opinion, what technology is having the biggest impact as organizations rebuild or optimize the enterprise?
Cloud, period.
Yeah.
That's it.
I figured you might
that's
say
an
that,
easy one.
yeah.
Yes.
So I guess, and along those lines, I mean, so, I think that was great. The example that you shared in some of those other companies that you're talking with that are thinking about the next normal, as you put it. What are some of the other hallmarks, I guess, of their plans, or some of the other things that they're keeping in mind when they're doing that planning?
Yeah, man, technology plans have been impacted in a big way, not just for the remainder of what we got of 2020, but really if Centera is a good sort of foreshadowing, really beyond. And while these plans have been volatile since March, many companies' tech charters really are finding a way to steam ahead. So if we just stay on the transformation track within the kind of full range of technology plans, we're seeing 59% of IT decision makers saying that pressures stemming from this pandemic are actually accelerating their digital transformation modernization efforts. And further to that end, despite obvious budget concerns, obvious kind of volatility around how companies are being stewards of their capital right now, global spending on transformation and modernization technologies and services are forecasted to grow more than 10% by the end of this year to 1.3 trillion, and that's trillion with a T. I mean, it's still huge to your question, but
Yeah.
the spending on digital tools has not been negatively impacted as much as other areas of IT. Mostly the large scale projects that have been underway are kind of kept intact if they're part of the broader strategy. So that's a reassuring thing for all of us. And to try to breathe life into some of this, we've got an amazing customer, a global airline, definitely a household name, that even in spite of the pandemic that we all know has certainly impacted airlines, has certainly impacted transportation. They've kept us engaged in migrating and modernizing a fleet of customer-facing applications to AWS, Amazon Web Services, because they're able to lower technical debt, they're able to lower TCO, they're able to enhance CX and customer experience. So this program is still intact since we were able to affirm the value to the business, even in light of this sharp drop in airline traffic and revenue and all that. So it's been very, very reassuring that plans whose business cases are tight and are quantified, they're typically still marching forward.
Yeah.
We see a lot of new things too, like digital exhaust and that there's, but I think the good news is that if you're proving your business case and your value, the plans are staying intact and they're expanding into that next normal.
Yeah. So, I mean, clearly a lot of organizations are adopting the cloud and have already adopted it. And, so for those that either are still considering either a move or moving some of their legacy applications and things to the cloud, what are some of the big rocks that organizations need to first consider or prioritize before they integrate with the cloud?
Yeah, that's a good place to go. And I'd say simply value, vision, and expectations are really non-negotiable. Big
Yeah.
rocks. We found that unless companies possess aggressive agreement on the business value they're looking to derive from an app cloud migration or a modernization effort, and unless they hold themselves accountable to measurable expectations, they'll usually be really unhappy with the results. And that there's a really pathological trick in there that we're seeing a trickle down affecting and negatively impairing other modernization and transformation efforts inside of the organization that will start to stall out like dominoes. Oh, and the company executives also, in terms of big rocks, need to be active sponsors of these initiatives, or really the projects just become victims to politics, interorganizational budget pressures, stuff like that. So it sounds super obvious that any business would really nail down their goals and outcomes with executive sponsorship before jumping in the cloud pool or any transformation pool, but really you'd be surprised. So setting a vision and goals for the why behind doing cloud, having very measurable expectations to holding yourself accountable to, very vital. And and I'll give you like a real hypothetical here, like in quotes, we're going to migrate and modernize. Like, here's the vision: we're going to migrate and modernize this order fulfillment application so that we can delight our customers, which will validate. Here's the quantifiable part. We'll validate by moving our our NPS scores from 60 to 80, while also reducing technical debt and resulting cost basis somewhere in the order of, and again, I'm making it up, $1 million yearly, just an example. But if you start with this approach, Greg, you can actually build real value streams into how you technically deliver these goals across an accountable cloud journey or project plan. And at least here at TEKsystems, we try to make that process super easy for our customers with a very lightweight, very repeatable value framework process. But back to the big rocks, if I could, once that foundation is set, we offer customers a variety of other means and tools to kind of peer into the future at what other priorities and big issues, big rocks they have to consider along the journey. And AWS has one tool that we love a lot. It's called the CAF, Cloud Adoption Framework. It's another acronym for you in case you're keeping track.
We needed another one, but
well, I've got more, but we leverage that framework for loads of app migrations and modernizations. And on a webcast, I'd probably pop up a visual aid, but for the sake of our listening audience, if you picture like an X and Y axis representing time and value respectively, and if you plot your migration journey across which you will experience all the big rocks. But if you plot that migration journey on this illustration, typically you start off with low-hanging fruit dev and test workloads at the center point of the axis, like 0, for any of the cartograph nerds out there. And these workloads, like dev and test workloads, are easy to lift out of your existing environment. They allow you to experiment and explore how apps actually work in the cloud. You gain confidence. You begin to baseline infrastructure, access, security dimensions. You get to condition your builder community, your users, all of which really helps you begin to set your operating foundation, your principles, your standards, all on this new cool platform. And if you're still kind of on that visual line with me that now is moving across the time axis and slightly up the value line, at this point, we typically start planning for a mass migration. And that's like the real juicy workloads, Greg, like, production stuff, applications that are way more pertinent and workloads that are way more pertinent to the business. But at this stage of the journey, sometimes you encounter what is referred to as the great stall. And the great stall is where you stop moving up the graph on your journey, either because of complexity, internal politics, not getting ROI fast enough. Maybe you've got some internal haters that fear the cloud. Maybe there's organizational fatigue. But to the question, some of the big rocks that you really have to nail down at this stage, which take way more thought and way more time, are like, hey, do we lift and shift our app? Do we lift and replatform the app? Do we refactor and then shift? And to dignify those questions, you've got to address things that you and I have discussed before, like problems in existing architecture, tight coupling, prohibitive dependencies, design and debt flaws that, if you remember our microservices conversation, tries to cure a lot of that. But if you don't, and you don't cure those big rocks at this point, and you lift and shift your architectural issues to cloud as is, you're just changing the location of your problems. But since that target platform is usually new to a given org, most companies actually double or triple the issues that that they're dealing with. So the big rocks become massive boulders.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about security. So as organizations increase their reliance on the cloud, what are some of the security concerns that they need to think about, and what are some misconceptions?
Sure. Yeah, this is huge, and this is what keeps people up at night. And I think it's fair to say that although security's mission is the same as it ever was or is on-prem, to lower risk, to lower exposure, to mitigate vulnerability of a company's data and systems, we've not now got cloud, hybrid, multi-cloud environments, and they're certainly making that mission more complex as the reliance grows. More and more of your workloads get on The cloud, you're going to see more risk. And we're seeing a number of organizations right now with related challenges whose initial cloud journey that I tried to describe was either charted independently or charted with like big box integrators. Eventually, we arrive on the scene. We're trying to do some kind of additive migration or integration work, but we get into the environment, and Greg, we start tripping over open ports, unprotected databases, open S3 buckets. They're not scanning imported libraries from Git and stuff. It's bad. I mean, bad stuff. No blacklisting of bad IPs, just lots of badness. And yeah, for us, this is just a big head scratcher because you got the CSPs, the actual platforms, AWS, Google, Snowflake, they've got native security features that are pretty solid, but they are indeed complex. And, the responsibility for security is segmented at the network level and it's segmented contractually. So regardless of that cloud platform, at the end of the day, Greg, the companies are the guardians of their own data and the guardians of their own access to the data, not the cloud platform. So if companies don't know what they're doing, they can run into big issues fast. We could talk about IAM, identity and access management examples there. We could talk about things like really cool functions that we like inside of AWS, like this thing called security groups that acts like a built-in firewall for servers. There are so many neat tools, features, services, functions at hand. But that none of it makes any sense unless you've got the know-how, unless you've got a really expert hand to sort of guide you there. So, and that's just kind of existing steady state. And that's like meat and potatoes stuff with cloud security, but we're dealing with evolving threats and new dilemmas for governance with this work from home phenomena that's
Right.
rife. We could probably talk for days there, but if what we're finding now, especially with new collaboration stacks that are spinning up left and right, if our customers are not actively wrapping and testing and pen testing and threat testing and then rewrapping that environment, they've got this like risk accumulation that is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So, yeah, big topic, but these are the concerns now that it's really the complexity, it's the ownership, and it's the evolution of threats and potential governance issues out there that has only been heightened and has only been made a little more mystifying with this new virtual dynamic that has affected all of the planet right now.
Right. So besides security and some of those other things that you mentioned, what are some of the other challenges that organizations may face with integrations? I know you touched on several, but particularly when we're talking about getting value from investment.
Yeah. A few areas immediately come to mind, like cost and talent and speed. And, if I could just maybe add some bullets to each one of these for you, like regarding cost, there have been some really misguided articles and white papers put out recently, which have done a fantastically poor job trying to refute the cost savings value that cloud gives you. And the authors of these papers are curiously targeting AWS, Google Cloud, and Azure and trying to prove that they are more expensive than standard issue on-prem operations. Now, the examples that the authors use in these misguided white papers and articles to support their claims, they surround companies who are definitely spending more since they're doing a very bad job of managing their new environment, resources, utilization. But if I were a betting person, I'd put money on these publications being sponsored by rival companies like Oracle, who are just trying to throw some shade at the industry leaders out there. But and instead of innovating and focusing on customer value, you've got the kind of rivals and the haters that are trying to sort of market and defame their way against the cloud tide. But that said, cloud is definitely more expensive unless you know how to responsibly operate that environment. And again, at the risk of sounding like an AWS commercial, just using them as an example, we'd say that companies who are either squandering their investment or simply looking to better hone their investment, those are candidates for what we call a well-architected review, where they focus on cost optimization. If we just take that one tier of value to your question, and these reviews, these well-architected reviews that we do for companies, inside we do things like match supply and demand to ensure that they're utilizing the right volume and right sorts of instance types for their unique workloads. And instances are just servers and AWS speak, but you can overspend greatly, Greg, if you're mismatching here. And we also make sure inside of these reviews that customers are allocating cost-effective resources therein using things like RIs or reserved instances in advance. And you can get really steep discounts from an AWS for reserving instances for steady state workloads, which are kind of more predictable or just running all the time. So that is kind of one little activation to really squeeze more value out. We monitor expenditures with things like auto scaling policies that ensures, everybody talks about cloud being the biggest scale driver and scale factor on the planet, and it's true. Yeah. But you're not running at peak scale all the time. So we help customers set policies that automatically scale out or scale in or turn instances and services completely off during downtime. So those are some of the smart sort of levers and responsible management for that new environment that tries to drive out way more value. The other areas there's so many things to talk about there, but to be mindful of time and talk about the other areas. And I know we talk about these in our version next now publication. So if anybody has the chance to read that at the conclusion of this podcast, that'd be really cool. But we got talent and speed. And on the talent side, you cannot just try to staff or recruit your way into transformation or to try to achieve value in the cloud by throwing skills at the problem. You need a great plan and a great partner. And we've got a real good partner in Sam Coker. He features in our version Next Now Cloud Edition for everyone that's going to check that out after this podcast. But Sam Coker is, and he's the healthcare lead for solutions architecture at AWS. But he says at the end of the day, it's not the tech that's going to give you value when it comes to talent. It's getting quote unquote professionals up to speed on how to perform their daily tasks on the cloud, and that education is the best gap closer along with a good partner to help. So really, we can talk technology all day long, but you need your workforce being able to be really effective on that platform. And unless you are closing that knowledge gap and retraining and upskilling, then it's kind of all for naught. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Greg, either last week or the week before, you spoke to Leslie Deutsch from TEKsystems about future workforce. So she leads our learning solutions practice here. Does a fantastic job with learning solutions. And because of her and her team, AWS just named Tech Global Services, just named us as their first consulting partner to achieve ATP status, or AWS training partner status. And that's a big, big part of that journey, to your question, to extract value. So it's another option that we provide our customers of not just going in and helping to move, modernize, and migrate infrastructure and applications, but we're looking to do that same modernization with their workforce. And that gives them more choices, Greg. It gives them more of an ability to not be beholden to us, but really to have options in how they scale workforce and how they really try to take their cloud plans big in the future. So that's just part of our own virtuous cycle. But I could probably close this part of the conversation off with speed. That's the third biggie. Yeah. I would say that, especially during a time when the pandemic is putting pressure on budgets and putting, real volatile scrutiny on enterprise spend, we like to stand by the mantra of enabling cloud journeys. And again, in air quotes, I'm doing more air quotes for you. Uh-huh. And I'm doing them very emotionally too, because it's Hispanic Heritage Month. And I've got a lot of salsa that I have to get out here. But no, we do. We stand by enabling cloud journeys quicker, better, faster. And to not only do we fulfill those nice words with things like the value framework that we discussed, or business modernization framework that we've discussed previously, but we're showing up to our customers with hundreds of thousands of lines of code standing up, reusable cloud foundation libraries, cloud migration toolkits, AI ML libraries, microservices frameworks, automated code pipeline and CI/CD capabilities, all kind of giant data migration frameworks from Oracle to Snowflake or Redshift or BigQuery. We've got reusable use cases for healthcare, FinServe, consumer products, media and entertainment. It's really about bringing to bear a consolidation of thousands of past performances, all indexed, all organized, and continuously groomed in such a way that we can get our customers down the cloud path, again, quicker, better, faster. And for us, that this really just turns our contribution into measurable value when you have somebody like us who does not have to reinvent the wheel for every customer cloud journey or migration or native dev project or modern, what have you, anything you want to do in the cloud. So that's those three for me at least stand out mightily. Cost, talent, speed.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, I mean, it definitely sounds like there's a lot of work ahead for organizations and still a lot of unknowns, as well as opportunity for organizations to look to build resiliency and return to growth in the next normal. What's maybe the next step or some tips or best practices that you would have for organizations to consider on this cloud journey, and how do you recommend organizations future-proof their cloud investments?
Yeah. Even beyond all the savage wisdom that we've exchanged so far, I could probably summarize by saying ongoing leadership buy-in, leadership alignment, leadership sponsorship of all cloud plans to the top of the house, super important. Organizations absolutely have to forge remarkable partnerships, not just with their cloud service provider or providers, plural, for multi-cloud enterprises, but also partnerships with a modern system integrator and consulting organization like TEKsystems. And really, again, not to be too gratuitous, but to put a fine point on that one, during last December's reInvent conference, you remember, Greg, like last December before civilization as we know it ended,
Right,
thanks
right.
to the
Barely, but
yeah.
it's
But Andy Jassy, AWS's CEO, talked about this sort of modern partner as the new guard, in quotes, of SIs, system integrators who really provably deliver quicker, better, faster across all the emerging platforms out there. So, that is key. That real modern new guard SI and consulting partner. But on the talent topic we covered, I'd say creating more bandwidth for your knowledge workers, free up your best people, and really have a program on developing more of your best people, boot camps, upskilling, next gen workforce programs that Leslie shared. Really, really important that organizations empower their employees to chart their own future. We talked about speed, optimizing your organization for speed in everything, starting with quick wins, iterating up, like we talked about with cloud adoption framework. And relatedly, this I know is near and dear to your heart, and I know we've talked about this before, but the ongoing conversation with our customers about not just doing agile theater and merely
right.
billowing like a lot of hot air around being an agile organization who can make good on cloud investments. But to your question, like living and breathing actual cloud agility to drive out value and future proof the investment with important, down to important cultural traits, I'd say, like things like continuous feedback loops across all employees as an accountable mechanism by which you're going to continuously improve and innovate is super, super important. And, this doesn't sound techie, but in a more organizational sense and not just cloud related, we've put forth the imperative, not just in version next now, but really in our organization, of cultivating our leaders here inside of Tech Global Services and our customers, but cultivating leaders for a virtual world during crazy times with a premium really very simply, Greg, on just being human, checking in on teams, possessing extreme empathy always, and keeping well-being top of mind, not just across your teams, but the mental, physical, and emotional self-care of the leaders themselves. That has to happen. And I guess if I could just cap all that off, I'd say finally, but most importantly, because this is the key that opens up all that other goodness, is to hold on to business value as the North Star. Without that in cloud, you're just playing house, truly.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, Ricardo, thanks so much for joining the show. I love that you even found a way to work Agile into it. So bonus points for that. For those listening, what's the best way to keep up with what you and TEKsystems are doing in cloud space?
Oh gosh, we are all over Twitter. We are all over Insta. We are on LinkedIn. You can check out version next now at TEKsystems. There are a bunch of different means to get to us. And hopefully, if you're listening, you've probably been the subject of a campaign recently. Sitting in your inbox, don't delete it. Check it out. Lots of good content, lots of good wisdom in there. And really, our goal is to talk to as many folks during this crazy sort of pandemic era as possible, so we can at least help the cloud portion of their experience and the modernization and the transformation portion of their experience be as friction free as possible.
Great. Well, again, I'd like to thank Ricardo Madan from TEKsystems for joining the show. Learn more about TEKsystems and their perspective on the cloud at teksystems.com/version next now. I'm Greg Kihlstrom. Thanks for listening to the Agile World. See you next week. Thanks again for listening to the Agile World podcast, brought to you by TEKsystems. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom. You can learn more and get a copy of my latest book, The Center of Experience, from my website at theagile.world or on Amazon or other retailers. Until next week, stay agile.